Hello, everyone. This is the first segment in my coverage of the Polaris 70th Anniversary Vintage Sled Show that happened up in Roseau on August 17th, 2024. And I'm going to lead this off with a fantastic interview with Scott Gottschalk of the Gottschalk Family Museums. Scott knows a lot about a lot, and he's going to tell us about the Polaris X3 and some other sleds. So stick around for that. Folks, we're here with Scott Gottschalk of the Gottschalk Family Museums, and Scott knows a lot about a lot. So we're going to trouble him for some of the story on the X3 today.
Yeah, well, hello everybody. It is a great piece of history. This was built and designed by the Polaris, race department and the design department, and it's very interesting. Today, Mike Baker, who was one of the original designers of the Polaris X2 and the Polaris X3 that were speed land record machines. And he came and signed this for us today. And it was a great story. He says, I'm the first one that test drove the X3 in 1971. And he says, I got in this thing and took off, and he says, we spun the track right off it. This thing in its peak could do 129 miles an hour in 1,000 feet.
Wow.
Now that's pretty fast for 1971.
Heck yeah.
That's a standard snowmobile track under this. It's a 15-inch cleated track.
Wow.
And it was never designed to spin at 150 miles an hour, so they blew the tracks right off this thing. They designed this to be very low to the ground. It was only 5 inches off the ground. It was designed to take this off and you get in the cockpit laying on your belly. Your feet go down this way. Your face is looking between those three carburetors, and you've got your steering mechanism here. They rope started both engines with pull start ropes on gasoline. Then they got in ready for the speed record, hit the button, and they ran on alcohol and nitrous. That's a bomb. And where this really gets interesting is they designed it so aerodynamic. To do the speed record, you have to wear a helmet.
Yeah.
They strapped in the cockpit, and it's so aerodynamic, a helmet won't fit. So they had to run it without the aerodynamic part to wear a helmet. But eventually they were running this on fast runs, and they got close to 130 miles an hour and 1,000 feet. But I always get a kick out of this. So you're sitting in here with your face right here, burning alcohol and nitrous, 2 inches from your face, no helmet, you're strapped in. If that engine blows, I'm sure that plexiglass will just bounce those pistons right off, and it won't hurt anybody. I'm sure that won't hurt us all. So anyway, this was the run of it in 1971 at West Yellowstone National Park.
Sure.
They didn't do very well on this initial attempt because it had just snowed. This thing snow plowed and was pushing snow over the top of it, and they only got about 99 miles per hour in 1,000 feet. They later got on better snow, and they were able to get, I think, 129 miles an hour in 1,000 feet. So the remnants of this was built and designed and tested by Polaris in 1970-71. That particular year, Polaris owned the circular track races. I mean, with their TX2 plus ones and stuff, they won a couple of trophies in 1971. They took some of them same 795s and put 2 of them into this beast, and they were able to smoke the track pretty darn good. And so this is 71 with their winnings by Polaris back then. As soon as they were done with this race, that season or whatever, this went off in some Quonset building, at the Polaris site, and Les Pins from Isle, Minnesota, in 1995 or something like that, went back up to Roseau and said, "What happened to the X3?" They said, "What's back there in that Quonset, but just pieces of it." So he found those pieces. He found the frame and he found the shell, and he restored it. The engines were gone. They are the right engines, but they're replacement engines. Got it working, got it running, got everything synchronized up, and Les Pins has shown it and had it in his museum in Isle, Minnesota for a number of years. And he blessed us with the opportunity to be the next museum to have it now. And part of the reason for that is I've got a 39 and a 41-year-old son, and they're extremely mechanical, and Les likes them better than me, and they like him better than me too. They're very mechanically orientated, and Les said, "I want this to carry forward with people that are young enough and knowledgeable enough to keep this kind of stuff running and tell the story." So that's the history of the famous Polaris X3.
Awesome. And channel viewers, if you've been watching for a long time, you met Scott's son Trevor up at the Hall of Fame 2023, I think.
Yes.
You guys had the Articat semi-truck up there.
Restored that frame-off restoration, correct.
Yeah, it's beautiful. These guys do unbelievable work. Unbelievable. Well, let's go talk about the sleds you brought, the other sleds, Scott.
All right, very good. All right, so we're going to be here doing a little bit of another history lesson on some of the particulars of the things from the Gottschalk Family Museum near Kimball, Minnesota. This would be a 1963 pull-behind sled. Don't really know how many of those were made back in 1963, but you don't find a lot of them, okay? And we found this one in a dairy barn out in New Jersey, missing the skis. Wasn't even sure what it was, but we figured it was Polaris and it had to have some historical value. We brought it back, so we had the actual pull behind Sled and the tongue. Believe it or not, our friend Tony Rolfus had the correct skis for it, and we put it back together, so this is what it would have looked like when it would have been sold. This particular pull behind sled also could have been ordered with a canvas over the top of it, and it would have been a pretty useful piece of equipment if you were going out in the woods or you were going to be trapping or whatever you were going to do. So that's one of the original ones. Now this is kind of a fun thing. Polaris, when they came out with the LA 55s, 57s, no 55, LA 55s, that became the smaller sled they went with, but they were prototyping 3 1962 Model B57s. That's a 5.7 horsepower Briggs & Stratton. And that is this machine in 1962.
Wow.
Nice and shiny, and it's talking about being one of the prototypes for a new design of a smaller, more practical rear engine riding snowmobile. Very interesting, the prototypes had the star right there in the center, whereas the North Star Polaris sign emblem is on the outsides of other sleds, but the prototypes had it right in the middle. And again, it's pretty neat. This sat out in the woods forlorn for decades, and we decided to put it in the museum. In fact, we decided to bring it here today because you look at restored stuff, but that's original.
I love original.
That's very original with the 5.7 horsepower brakes on the back of it, and it's a little seized up and a little bit. It's old and forlorn, but it's a great story. It's a great part of history again.
That is so cool, Scott.
Yep. Okay, so this is arguably the most controversial snowmobile that's ever been to the Arctic Cat anniversaries and the Polaris anniversaries. So true story, a couple of brothers find this in a salvage yard in this area many years ago. They look at this rusty thing.
Yeah.
And they go, it has Polaris LA55 handlebars. It has Polaris skis. It has several Polaris parts on it. It must be a Polaris prototype. At the 50th anniversary of Polaris, this thing comes out looking like this, but it's being shown as a Polaris prototype. Edgar Hattin walks by this sled and he goes, "Who's got the guts to show the first Arctic Cat I ever made at the Polaris 50th anniversary?"
Oh,
Yes. He then signs the seat right here. Edgar Hattin's signature. He signs this machine and says, "I thought the next thing we were going to move into when I left Polaris and started a new company in Thief River Falls," he says, "my first ones were Polars." Notice Polar.
yeah.
And then I changed it to Arctic Cat after, a couple dozen of these Polars.
Yeah.
But he said the very first prototype that I built was, I figured since Skidoo was coming out with front engine, sportier looking snow machines, I was going to design one. And then he said, I scrubbed the idea because I didn't feel the Midwest was ready for a front engine snowmobile yet. We'll let Skidoo do it. This was his prototype of the first ever Minnesota-made front engine mounted snowmobile, and it's an Arctic Cat, okay? So it was at the 50th anniversary, shown as a Polaris. Then a couple years later, it's shown at the Arctic Cat 50th anniversary as an Arctic Cat. Then I came back here 5 years ago at the 65th anniversary of this, and I remember them stopping me out here on the end, and they said, "What do you got?" And I said, "I got that first ever Arctic Cat that's 60% Polaris." And they said, "Well, you can't bring that in here." And I said, "Well, it's already been shown at the 50th. Why can't we show it at the 65th?" So we showed it at the 65th. It was also shown a year or two ago at the Arctic Cat 60th anniversary.
Huh.
And now it's at the Polaris 70th anniversary. So we lovingly say, this is the only snowmobile in America that has been at all of the national Polaris and Arctic Cat events, all of them. And you tell me, it's more Polaris than it is Arctic Cat because of the parts that are on it. And yet Edgar Hattin says it is my first Polar Arctic Cat.
That is great.
Pretty fun story.
Yeah.
All right, so this is one of the star cars. What I think I know is they claim that there were 150 star cars that were made down here in the United States, and supposedly 150 of them were made in Canada. All right, so there must have been approximately 300 of these once upon a time. There was a massive recall. These came out in 1969, and they had midget car races, and they were having these barn races all over the country. Here's the problem. You bolt in a single-cylinder snowmobile engine in this thing, and these things 2 inches off the ground could go 85 miles an hour. If you had enough guts, you bolted in a twin cylinder on the back of these things, and them would crack 120 miles an hour this far off the ground. Very poor brakes, very poor steering ability. Now I'm going to tell you something, Polaris started adding this up. Put a 12-year-old kid behind this thing and have him snap on down the road at 100 miles an hour. You know right where the bumper of a pickup truck is? Right about where the kid's head is. Polaris said, no, we're recalling them. They had an almost perfect recall. These that were sold here in the upper Midwest were collected and landfilled over here underneath the plastics factory. They landfilled, I don't know, 100 of these underneath. The plastics factory is on top of the Star Cars. Out in the New England states, and this was a New England state Star Car. I ended up finding it at the snowmobile barn in New Jersey. They had 650 snowmobiles and they were shutting the door. They were closing up and selling everything. I went out there and I got the keys to every building he had and several shipping containers that had padlocks on them. I spent the better part of a day looking through about 30 shipping containers, semi-trucks, barns, buildings, and I find this thing. And I said, you know you've got almost a brand new Star Car sitting out in that shipping container. He goes, oh, I forgot I got that thing 20 years ago. I said, how do you forget you have a Star Car? I said, you don't find them anywhere. And he goes, well, he says the story on this is, he says, in Pennsylvania, a Polaris employee was supposed to collect the Star Cars. And I don't know, I heard they either gave them their money back or they allowed them to get a free snowmobile off next season's run if they bring the Star Car back, because Polaris didn't want the liability. This guy has collected all of the Star Cars that are in New York, Maine, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Vermont, and he's at an incinerator all night long, pulling the wheels off, pulling the engines out, probably pulled the steering wheel out. He got down to, this is a Polaris employee. 2 o'clock in the morning, he's melted the second to the last one of these in an incinerator. This one was so close to it, it melted the windshield.
Wow.
And then he stole it and put it in the back of his pickup truck. As he's starting to drive back home to Pennsylvania, he's going, I stole company property. They'll fire me or put me in jail and he didn't know what to do anymore because the incinerator was shut down. True story. He goes back to his house. His wife's asleep in the house. He puts this in the front of the 2-car garage, buries it behind boxes, covers it with blankets, and for 30 years his wife never knew there was a Star Car sitting in the front of his garage. And he never told a single soul that he had that Star Car because he didn't want to get fired, he didn't want to go to jail, and he didn't want to lose his pension from this company, Polaris. All right. The Snowmobile Barn Museum gets a phone call many years ago from this guy who's 80-some years old. And he says, I want to donate this Star Car to this museum. I've got stage 4 cancer. I've got 3 months to live. I'm going to tell you the story, but I guess if Polaris is going to get rid of my pension now, I'm going to be dead in a couple of months anyway. And so I always say, when it comes to, if you scan this building, there's hundreds of old, cool snowmobiles in here. But you know what? They're just a bunch of old snowmobiles. It's the story that counts. It's the history that counts. It's the guy that was afraid he was going to lose his job by stealing this thing. That's the story, not just it's another cool looking old car. Enough on that.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, so the Hattin Derrick and Hoist Company was the first thing started by Edgar Hattin, his brother Alan, and David Johnson. And they were a farm equipment company. They were making grain ear corn elevators that would drop ear corns into corn cribs. I want you to take these old snowmobiles and tell me that that's not the ear corn elevator that it is. It really is. It was an ear corn elevator that they turned into a snow machine. But first, back in the 40s, the Hattin and Derrick and Hoist Company were making corn cribs. They were making wheat straw, or straw choppers for combines. They were making all kinds of stuff. Okay, sprayers and all kinds of stuff. And it's a great story because we've had so many people say the Polaris North Star never became an emblem until snowmobiles were made, and the first 6 or 8 of those were actually in 1956, okay? That logo never showed up until then. Now this is a 1940 straw chopper.
Wow.
And I could swear that that is a Polaris North Star. I could swear it ain't fake either. I'm pretty sure that that's an original stencil from the 1940s, but I want to set the record straight. Polaris was incorporated and the name was changed from Hattin Hoist and Derrick Company in 1954 to Polaris Industries. Therefore, we are celebrating Polaris's 70th birthday today because it changed from the old name to the Polaris Industries name in 1954. First snowmobiles weren't made until 1956, but they had been using that. They were using that on farm equipment before there was anything called a snowmobile. So it's just kind of a neat piece of history. Our grandson took this and linseed oiled it up to kind of pull out the natural colors. You almost couldn't see that, it sat outside in the weeds forever and just kind of moistened it up, brought the colors out. But they were making that a long time before they were ever making snowmobiles. Now, a fun fact I like to say is I grew up on a dairy farm. Did my grandpa or my dad ever have a straw chopper on any of our combines? If you milk cows, you needed the straw. You baled the straw. You bedded with the straw. It was only the western states like South Dakota, North Dakota, Saskatchewan. This company in Roseau sold thousands of these things to wheatland farmers because they wanted to chop the straw up and be able to plow the ground. They didn't have dairy cows. They didn't need to bed with the straw. So we didn't have any of these in Minnesota. We didn't need them. We were milking cows. We needed straw. But that's, again, a fun fact, okay? They sold a boatload of these things, and some of them would have said Polaris on them. All right. Last but not least of what we've got here today is, and it's always a good thing to learn, okay? We picked this up from the son of a deceased man in St. Louis, Missouri, 5 years ago. And they had contacted me and said, "Are you interested in old Polarises?" And I said, "Well, we've got several. We've got several old Polaris rear engine riders. We're running out of room at the museum." He says, "Well, my dad died 10 years ago, but he bought a brand new 1957 rear engine rider snow traveler." I said, "I'll be there tomorrow morning." So this is it. She runs like a top. We go trail riding with this thing all winter long. It runs just like a baby. However, yesterday, somebody far more knowledgeable than me, and I always want to make it right. That's why that said 1957, we spared no amount of expense to turn that into an 8. And here's what I was told. Based on its serial number, it was an end of 57, but it's a 58. The man did buy it in 1957, but it's not a 1957, it's a 1958. You know how that works. You know, they do that with John Deere tractors too. They make them in the fall, but it's next year's tractor.
Right.
Well, I think cars are the same way.
Yep.
But he said, I can prove it. That's a 1958 steering wheel. That's a 1958 serial tag and a serial tag number.
Give them a look at that wheel.
Yeah, and the 57 serial tags are brass.
Really?
That's not brass.
That was definitely aluminum.
The 1957s don't have a spring back here. So he said it is absolutely a 1958. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't make you mad. I said, no, we don't want to say it's something it's not. We want to say exactly what it is. And there's a little truth. The man that died bought a 1957 Polaris. It just was a 1958, okay? So now we know the truth. And they're still really neat old pieces of history. But more importantly, we like to bring this stuff out and use it, you know? I mean, we like to take it on trail rides. We like to give kids rides on this thing. And they don't, you know, I mean, I granted if you got one that's on a trailer and it don't run, that's fine. But our grandkids back there and this son of mine right here, it ain't on our place unless it runs. That's the rule. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Awesome, Scott. You know, this may be a whole episode unto itself. That was fantastic, and I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So I want to give a huge plug to Scott and his museum here. Scott, I really appreciate this interview. It was awesome. And right now I'm showing the card that you give out at these events. Now, I've seen the Gottschalk family displays at several events, and they're always impressive. I personally haven't been to the museum yet, but I plan to get out there. It's located in Kimball, Minnesota. And if you want to go, the first comment is going to be pinned, and it's going to have Scott's email address. So you do have to contact Scott before you go out there. And I would encourage you to do so. So with that said, I want to give a huge shout out to the patrons. Thanks for your support of the channel, guys. Really appreciate it. For those that don't know, the patrons give us a little support on the Patreon app or webpage every month. And in return, they get to see all the videos early. They get to see them ad-free. And there's patron-only videos. And there's a few from this Roseau 70th that they're going to get that the rest of the world won't. So if you're curious about that, you'll have to sign up on the Patreon. Everybody else, if you watch this far, you know you like what we're doing. So please hit subscribe. Really appreciate that. Hit the notification bell so you know when the next video from the Roseau 70th comes out, because there's more coming. And, well, we'll see you on the trails.